Today on Cyberwork Hacks, Infosec Bootcamp instructor Tommy Gober joins me to walk you through the mechanics of CompTIA's Network Plus exam.
Here's your first one, Chris. I'm going to put you on the spot. You're going to have to answer this one.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Tommy has prepared a few sample questions similar to the Net Plus exam and helps you through the thought process behind each question.
It's not that clean cut. It's usually kind of embedded somewhat in a scenario. The user can't connect, which is the IP address of that. And so having that practice can really help lock in and cement those understandings.
If you're studying networking now or are interested in doing so, and you want to see if your knowledge is on track, keep it here for today's Cyberwork. The IT and cybersecurity job market is thriving. Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts 377,500 new IT jobs annually. You need skill and hustle to obtain these jobs, of course, but the good news is that cybersecurity professionals can look forward to extremely competitive salaries. That's why Infosec has leveraged 20 years of industry experience, drawing from multiple sources to give you, Cyberwork listeners, an analysis of the most popular and top-paying industry certifications. You can use it to navigate your way to a good-paying cybersecurity career. So to get your free copy of our Cybersecurity Salary Guide ebook, just click the link in the description below. It's right there near the top, just below me. You can't miss it. Click the link in the description and download our free Cybersecurity Salary Guide ebook. Your cybersecurity journey starts here. Now, let's get the show started. Welcome to a new episode of Cyberwork Hacks. Purpose of the spinoff of our popular Cyberwork podcast is to take a single fundamental question and give you a quick, clear, and actionable solution to that problem, or a new insight into how to utilize Infosec products and training to achieve your work and career goals. Now, speaking of that, Tommy Gober is an Infosec instructor, and he's a bootcamp instructor for not only the Security Plus certification, and we've got several episodes with Tommy on the feed as well. Go check them out, but CompTIA's Network Certification Bootcamp as well. So for today's Cyberwork Hack, Tommy and I are going to walk you through how network questions are constructed and how you should approach them when taking the exam. So thanks for joining me today, Tommy. Appreciate it.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me back.
All right. And thank you to your teaching assistant.
I'm under attack by Amazon every day.
Very sweet. Very sweet. So Tommy, we've heard from some Network Plus cert holders that the experience of studying for the exam and learning the concepts of networking kind of felt different from the experience of actually trying to convey that knowledge in the method required by the exam. So can you talk about the different types of exam questions you'll see on the Net Plus?
Yeah. So on Network Plus and really across the entire CompTIA offering, you're going to see multiple choice. So where the question is, and you have A, B, C, or D. There's multiple answer, which is similar, but it's a little bit different. And that's where they usually will tell you select 2 of these 5 or more options. And then we have the performance-based questions. A lot of people really get really wrapped up on the performance-based questions. There's a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of worry with the performance-based questions. I tell my learners, don't worry about it. You've got this. When it comes to performance-based questions, it's the same content that all of your multiple choice, multiple answer questions are about, but you're just interacting with it in some way other than A, B, C, or D. So it's just a different modality, but it's the same content buried in.
Can you explain for people who haven't taken this kind of test before, what does that sort of in hands-on, question look like? What are you doing? You're on a screen, I assume, and are you sort of like moving things around or what?
Yeah. So excellent point. So I get that question quite a bit. The way that you're interacting with these is they will have slidable little movable tiles you can move around the screen, or there are radio buttons, little check boxes that you're selecting the appropriate settings, inputs, whatever the case may be, whatever the scenario setup is like. And then there's a limited amount of input where you might be on the Network Plus entering a specific IP address. They're going to give you a lot of basically hints and clues in the setup of what the specific IP address should be, but then you would just key that in. But they are not, and this is what a lot of people get really worried about, they are not giving you a command prompt and saying, okay, get to it, and get out there and here's a router, you need to set it up from scratch. It's not that involved, but it's just really a way to engage with some of the networking fundamentals, the concepts that are at play here. It's very, very hand wavy in general. because it's also worth noting too that CompTIA is not vendor specific. They're vendor agnostic, they're neutral. And so the way that Cisco might do something might be different than the way that Palo Alto, than the way Fortinet and others might do it. So they're not going to give you a command line because there's not just one single way of doing these things. It's all about those general concepts.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And yeah, I think that sounds a lot less scary than, like you said, setting up a network from scratch. But it just gives you a little more of a high touch, so that you're not just sort of thinking in theoretical terms, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Tommy, I think the best way, and this has already been a good start, but the best way to get a feeling for each of these types of questions is I've asked you to run a couple of example exam questions. So with your Sec Plus series, we walked through a few sample questions, and I'm hoping we can do that here as well. So if you have a chance, could you walk us through some of these test questions that you created and help us walk through to the right answer?
Yeah. So here's your first one, Chris. I'm going to put you on the spot. You're going to have to answer this one.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
So the question says, which of the following CIDR notations translates to 255.255.255.128? And first of all, the classless interdomain router routing notation, the CIDR notation that we've got here, is that slash notation. It's a way of expressing subnets. It's a way of expressing a lot of information about a block or bank of IP addresses. So this is something that gets touched on whenever we're getting into subnetting, is understanding the how and the why of this CIDR notation. So 255.255.255.128. That's kind of a weird looking subnet, because a lot of people are from their home networks maybe used to saying 255.255.255.0. But it's this 128 that we've got right here that kind of throws folks off. Well, one of the things that we do in our classes, we learn the how and the why. And so we get into understanding how these numbers come together. So this little table, you'll learn how to create one of these tables. This is not something you have at the ready on your exam. It's not like some sort of lookup chart that you've got. But what you can do is you can recall this, you can create this from memory, you can write it on some scratch paper when you're taking the exam. And what it's going to do is you write out your CIDR notations, and then you write out the number of addresses that CIDR notation or that subnet, because they are interchangeable. It's two ways of expressing the same concept. And so you create this lookup table. Now, when I present you with this lookup table, so Chris, you can look at this lookup table now, and you can see what slash number, what CIDR notation would we use for 255.255.255.128?
Well, we have 128 in the second column there with the 128 addresses. So I'm going to assume that it's B25.
B25. Here we go. Let's see. Bingo. Good job. You can learn.
I can learn slowly, but I can learn. Okay.
So we get into, how do you create this? There's a lot of, if you go poke around on the internet, there's a lot of other instructors that have different test taking hacks and tricks and techniques, and they have these really convoluted tables that you have to memorize. But it gets back to, if you understand the how and the why of networking, and the how and the why this table is created, once you know subnetting, this sort of a question is not a problem.
Got it.
So I've got one other question here for us.
Great.
Let's give it a shot here. Somewhat related. That's still in the neighborhood of subnetting, but it's looking at it a slightly different way. So how many usable IP addresses can be assigned to hosts on a /26 subnet? So there's that CIDR notation coming up again. And like I said, embedded in that, or somewhat encoded in that CIDR notation, is a lot of information about a network. So if we recall that table that we had from earlier, and again, you're going to be able to recreate this from memory whenever you go to sit down for the exam. At first, the answer is not readily apparent on here.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of get a sense of, okay, well, I'm looking at a /26 is the question. So if I look on my table here, I see a /26, but the answer choices don't really line up. They're off by a couple of numbers. If you look at how these numbers are kind of translated from over here. And the reason that they're off by 2, that's by design, is because you have to give up 2 addresses. Whenever you have a subnet, you give up 2 addresses. One is the name of your network, and one is the broadcast for that network. And of course, we get into what those mean as we get through the course. But in this case, you have 64 possible addresses, but notice that the question is asking about how many usable IP addresses. And so usable versus possible is a very subtle phrasing that's on there. And it could really, really throw you off, because if the answer here was 62 or 64, folks not paying attention might be tempted to answer something other than what they're asking here on usable. So we have 64 possible addresses, but the question is asking about usable. And so the answer on this one is C, Charlie. The number is 62 usable IP addresses.
Nice.
All right. And so I have a third one here, Chris.
Yeah, great.
Dive into this one here. So we're going to take a trip away from subnetting on this one.
Okay.
It gets a little tricky, a little confusing on this one because the answers are so similar to one another. The question is, which of the following IP addresses might a network host have if the user reports no internet connectivity? And this also is a fun question because it begins to shed some light on a thing that CompTIA really takes to heart, and that is to be able to troubleshoot issues, right? That's where
Absolutely.
this academic knowledge meets the real world. Is how do I apply this knowledge? How do I use it to troubleshoot? Well, in this case, the user says they don't have any internet connectivity. What IP address are we going to be looking at? From the course, we talk about the different types of IP addresses. We have private IP addresses. We have public IP addresses. And then there's also some reserved IP address blocks that are used for various purposes. And so right off the bat, anything starting with a 10, that's going to be a private IP address. Indeed, a lot of organizations, employers use 10 dot networks because they are a huge bank of IP addresses that any size organization can make use of. Next up we have a 164.113.51.145. That's a public IP address that belongs to some IP address holder. And so that's not one that we're going to have on a user's individual system.
Okay.
Answer C. A lot of folks probably have seen this. A lot of our viewers might have seen some jokes or memes about 127.0.0.1. That's a self-referential IP address. That one's reserved for referring back to a computer or back to a host. It's a way to check yourself, check your network connection, check your network interface controller. 127.0.0.1 is self-referential. So that's not the answer either.
I feel like when you have one that looks so completely different from the other 4, the easiest thing would be to say, well, that's got to be the answer. But at the same time, you immediately would have to think, well, that's too easy. So it can't possibly be the answer.
Yeah, a little too on the nose on that one.
Well, on the nose, yeah.
127.0.0.1, there's doormats, there's t-shirts.
Okay.
There's all sorts of nerd swag you can get for this.
All right. Going to TeePublic right after this.
There we go. I need this on a shirt.
Yeah.
The answer on this one is in fact letter D, Delta, 169.254.51.145. It looks very, very similar to the first 3. You can see that the last 2 octets here are in fact all the same, but it's those first 2 that are the giveaway. And the thing that I instill in my learners in the boot camps is if you see the IP address beginning with 169, you're having a bad time. 169, having a bad time. I had this little jig that I do. It gets it stuck in your head. 169, having a bad time.
All right.
The reason for that is because this is an automatic private IP address, and it's also known as APIPA. The automatic private IP address. This is the IP address that your computer will default to if it cannot reach an IP address server called your DHCP server. If you cannot make contact with your DHCP server, your computer kind of gives up and it defaults back to this 169.254 address. So 169, having a bad time. And that's where you're going to be able to then go through and troubleshoot, figure out why can't we connect the DHCP? And then you're off to more troubleshooting from that point.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I like that. Each of these is sort of covering something that's very foundational on one hand, but at the same time can be easily slipped up. They all have that just a little twist of
watch for it.
something that makes it not obvious. So
Yeah.
So Infosec's Network Plus Bootcamp. We're talking about that, of course, at the top, but it ends with a practice exam for the students before the actual exam, right? So can you tell us how that practice exam works and how it helps you to sort of retain your knowledge better when it is actually go time for the exam?
Yeah. So we do have a practice exam that we have throughout the course. You can take it different ways. It is part of Infosec's exam pass guarantee that we use with our learners. But with that practice exam, it really dives into a breadth of topics that we've got on the exam. It's drawn from the objectives that CompTIA puts out for the Network Plus, and it's a way to engage with that content and see how might these questions be styled when these questions are being asked of me, because it's not going to come right out and say, which of the following is the APIPA address? Oh, it's 169. And it's not that clean cut. It's usually kind of embedded somewhat in a scenario. The user can't connect, which is the IP address of that. And so it's not just going to be a real clean cut sort of question on this. And so having that practice can really help lock in and cement those understandings. Once you get past the practice exam, you should be set and ready for the final exam.
Yeah, I think that's really smart on their part as well, because I think when you're first starting, your first job, baby's first networking job or security job or whatever, you've got all this sort of theoretical concept in your head, and then someone says, I can't get this to work. And you're like, well, yeah, okay, well, what specific thing is it? And they're like, I don't know. So
yeah.
if you give people that kind of diagnostic mindset of solve the problem by eliminating things that it's clearly not and get to the thing that it could be. And
Right.
I think that's actually just a really good piece of sort of first level job skill, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. As we wrap up today, Tommy, what's your best piece of advice for exam day?
Relax. So people get so worked up whenever they go to take the exam. I recently wrapped up a course at the end. Somebody was like, I don't think I'm ready for this. I was like, really, honestly, you rarely feel like walking in, like you're going to kick the door in. I'm like, I'm going to show this test what's going on. You always have this, like, do I really know everything? And the fact is that you do. If you've gone through the boot camp with me, we've talked about all the topics that could be on the exam. We've covered all the objectives. And the truth is that you are ready for this. Trust your gut. I see time and again, people will answer a test question and then they go back and they go, well, and they think about it for a second and then they change it. And the whole time I'm just going, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, make sure that you have covered all the material when you're going into the exam. You rarely ever feel 110% prepared for the exam. There's always that mysterious unknown feeling, but relax. You've got this. Trust your gut and give it your best.
And that's also good advice in general. I think people of a certain personality, this guy, can think, well, if I don't know this topic inside out, backwards and forwards, like I wrote the book myself, then why even bother taking the exam? It's clearly going to fall all apart. And, I think like every important milestone in your life, you're not ready for it. You make yourself ready for it. So I think, relax and know that you have more than than you think you've got. So that's great advice. Yeah. Tommy Gober, thank you so much for demystifying that Network Plus exam. This was a blast.
Thanks, Chris.
And thank you all for watching this CyberWork hack. If you enjoyed it, share it with someone you know. It could be your social media contacts, your colleagues, your forum, but best of all, word of mouth recommendations are how shows like this grow their audience and continue and prosper. So make sure to also subscribe to our podcast feed and our YouTube page. If you type in CyberWork and Infosec into them, we'll pop up right near the top. We got a special thing going on there. So if you have any topics you want us to cover, drop them in the comments. We'll do what we can to get them on the show. So until next time, this is Chris Senko wishing you happy learning.